Welcome to this new episode of the Empowering Ability podcast. Today, it's my pleasure to bring to you Cesilee Coulson. And Cesilee is the executive director of the Washington Initiative for Supported Employment, otherwise known as WISE. She brings 25 years of experience in competitive integrated employment training and technical assistance to her position at WISE. And Cesilee uses her experience to assist with employment systems change and community employment capacity building. She holds a master's degree from the University of Oregon in sports psychology and an executive coaching certification from the Hudson Institute and a somatic coaching certification from the Strozzi Institute. Am I pronouncing that right, Cesilee?
Yes. Yeah, you did it. Nice
Awesome.
job.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Super excited to have you here. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yeah, excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you as well. So, for everybody listening, Cesilee came highly recommended as a person to engage with, to get to know, to chat with by friend of the podcast, Michael Kendrick. And Michael, I think, as we kind of chatted about earlier, Cesilee rarely steers either of us wrong. So,
No pressure.
if our conversation isn't helpful for folks, we're going to blame Michael. That's
That's
basically what I'm getting from this.
fair enough.
But that's not going to happen. So, excited to chat with you. And today our focus will be mostly around the area of supporting people with developmental disabilities to gain paid employment and sustain that paid employment. But before we kind of dive deeper into that conversation, maybe it'd be helpful for, listeners, Cesilee, just to get a better sense from you on what your current focuses are
Sure.
at WISE and how WISE, the work that WISE does.
Yeah, great. Happy to do that. I would say the best way to understand what WISE does is if you think about a whole community network of organizations that are all working towards employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're part of that. I guess Maze in Washington State, northwest corner of the US, and we do some work in some other states as well, but I'd say that's our home base. And really what we're geared to do is to help organizations, their staff do supported employment services. We have a variety of trainers in our organization that do training and support and technical assistance for organizations that are placing people into jobs. We also work with our government partners and help with public policy work, and I'd say managing the rules and trying to create the rules that are going to help more people get jobs and keep those fresh and keep those current. We also do some fun things around person-centered planning for employment, where that's really the touch point where we get to work with people with disabilities and families, along with our organizational partners that are doing placement services. So you'll see a good dozen of our staff that do person-centered employment planning services and do that for people that are working or people that have never worked before or people that are coming out of our school systems trying to look for their first job.
Yeah, great. And I'm trying to remember from a conversation that I had with Michael just a couple months ago, Michael Kendrick. I believe he told me that the employment rate for people with developmental disabilities is significantly higher in Washington State than potentially in other states. I don't know if you have stats in off the top of your head, but is that true?
Yeah, that is true. It's accurate. I think there's two things that are notable in Washington State. One is nearly it's over 80% of the people that are receiving day services in Washington State are in an individual employment service, either working or looking for work. So it is a primary focus of the state, and therefore the majority of the people that are receiving a day funded service are receiving an employment service specifically designed for their employment journey.
Okay.
Of those, any given day, between 60 and 65% of those individuals are employed. So it's a pretty high employment rate for those that are engaging in that service in our
Yeah,
state.
that's awesome. And just for reference, how might that compare to a national average or other states?
I think that I feel most confident comparing it nationally, and that the national average hovers between 20 and 25% employment. And so it's more than triple.
Yeah. So yeah, depending on the state, yeah, you're probably two and a half, three times higher, right?
Yeah.
And why is that? Like, what are some of the reasons for it?
Well, I think a long-term commitment to employment. That's the reputation of Washington State, is that it's not something that started just 10 years ago. It's been over 30 years that the state's been focused on developing the capacity to place people into jobs. And so we have legislation that focuses on that. We have our public policy that focuses there. And another, I think, secret ingredient in Washington State is that there's constant ongoing funding for training for professionals in our field to do placement services. And that's WISE was founded to do that training work. And so we're also 35 years old in terms of training and capacity building work. And so those partnerships and those policies and legislation going together all point in that direction for people to have the support they need to go to work.
Right. And what was I don't know if you have know this or not, but what was what caused that change? Like what was um what got the ball rolling in that direction?
Sure. It was a federal initiative originally. So in the 1980s, the United States put out grants for the states. And there were first 10 states, Washington was one that received a grant to build the program that we have operating now. And so they were special grant funds. Uh, the federal government at the time really saw that it was possible for people to go to work, and they wanted to incentivize states to build organizations that could support that effort. And so WISE was awarded that grant through our state, and then was able to use those funds to create organizations to do placement services. So it not only allowed us to help organizations start or build, but it allowed us to develop the training that was needed to support them on an ongoing basis. And Washington State just kept at that after the federal grant expired after the first 5 years. And they just kept funding that effort at the state level and didn't let that go. So they've really had a very specific commitment to employment for a very long time.
Okay, great. Um, and we're going to dive into some of those. Like, we're going to talk about so WISE focuses on kind of training the people doing the work, right? Doing the
Yes,
supporting
yes.
people to get it, people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities to get employment. So we're going to talk about that. But at a national level, do you
Mhm.
see movement happening right now towards encouraging fundings supported employment, or what are you seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a really awesome effort going on federally to try and point in the direction that I've just been describing.
Yeah.
I think what's kind of wonderful in the States is that you have the ability to customize how you go after these sorts of things, based on the culture of your state. But right now, it's even, I think, more important that our federal government's aligned with the whole notion of one person, one job, one employer. And it takes a while to get the policies all to align in the different departments, but that work's going on in a coordinated manner federally. We have wonderful legislation. It's called we call it WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And that's a little over 5 years right now, and 5 years old, I mean, right now. And so it's just starting to take hold nationwide. And um, I'm seeing lots of interesting things where states are trying to get the training built and the technical assistance built to help grow their organizations.
Right. Okay. That's great. It's good news that it's shifting in that direction. Um, so let's talk about supported employment itself and the practice of it. I think from what I've seen of many supported employment services, and I've interfaced with a few of them, helping families engage with those services in the past, is you might have a meeting with a a job coach or someone with a similar title to that, and they would sit down, try and learn a little bit more about you, and then they might suggest, well, what do you think about this type of job? What do you think about this type of job? What do you think about this type of job? And then they might be like, well, I know of these few opportunities, and maybe I'll have some conversations with those people, and and then, or they'll look at market rate, or jobs that might be on Indeed, for example, and show you those, and maybe try and help facilitate an interview, those sorts of things, maybe support you in the interview, maybe not. On the off chance that you do secure a job, they might go with you to help you learn that job, and do the training themselves. Often I've seen that. And then they'll start to slowly step away. And then after a couple of times of them helping you do some training, or it could be, a couple of months, then they kind of fade off into the distance and you might never hear from them again. So that's kind of the type of employment supports that I've seen. I'm sure you've seen all different sorts, but I'm guessing some of the training that you would provide would be different from what I'm just describing. So feel free to add to anything that I just shared in terms of what you kind of would see maybe in more, I don't know, traditional or outdated employment supports, and what does better practices look like?
Yeah, well, you didn't
At a
do
high
too
level.
bad. You did pretty good on the basic recipe. You described that. I think the thing that is, I think, interesting to wrap your head around when you're engaging with an employment organization, and if you've never done that before as a person seeking a job, or if you have a family member supporting you to engage in that service, is you do have to look at it like a service and not a program. So, in terms of maybe some of the things that you've been engaged with, whether it would be with school or other activities, you might be going to something that's pre-programmed for you. And with an individual job, it's really, you're getting a complimentary service, and you're getting somebody that comes in with hopefully a network of employers that they have relationships with, where they've made other placements, and or ideally that they're cultivating employer relationships all the time in their community for the opportunity they might have a candidate that matches to an employer to meet a need that they have. So a really good service agency, employment agency, will be cultivating employer relationships on an ongoing basis. So you want to look for that in your conversation with an organization too. How do you cultivate employers? Um, what are you doing to stay current with the new employers coming into your community? And how do you develop a new employer that you haven't had a relationship with before? Those are conversations you can have when you're interviewing one of these organizations. And I think the other thing to think about is that it's not only the relationships with the employers, but are they going to build a good relationship with you? And are they going to stay in touch with you? Are they providing you what you would consider good customer service? And I think it's always best to go in and set those expectations when you're engaging in a service. This is what our ultimate goal is. This is the kind of way we'd like to be communicated with. How frequently do we meet? What can we expect in the journey from unemployed to employed? I think those typical employment conversations that you could think if you were engaging in the service yourself, if you're interviewing on behalf of someone, And I would, highly recommend the person themselves being at the front of the interview process and being supported, however they choose to be supported, with friends, family, uh, a teacher, somebody significant in their life, and leading the interview as best that they can so that they feel comfortable with the relationship from the beginning, and
Mhm.
establishing that with the employment provider. In supported employment, the notion is that you'll have support uh, as much as you need at the time you need it. So if you think about, I said you had the basic recipe, the ongoing support may not be on the job site all the time, but the ongoing support is to help you think about your career advancement, um, needs as they come up. They're also there to, that support's there to help the employer think about advancing and meeting more of their needs as well in the relationship with you. And I think that's a piece that uh, the fading from the initial training is really a goal. And then it's, what's the goal after that? What's the next step moving forward to support you? Some people might need a lot of support in an ongoing fashion on their job that's more visible to the employer. But oftentimes that's not the case, and people need more support individually to think about their own growth and development and their career path progression.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm going to pause there for a second because that was a really long answer for
Yeah, no, that was
you.
great. And I've got some follow-up questions. So, um, what you're suggesting, what I'm hearing you suggest, or I think you're suggesting for families, is to interview that uh,
Yeah,
supportive employment agency or company. And I think for us as families, that's a bit of a change in mindset, because so often we're in the mindset of, I want to get whatever support that I can. And we kind of just
right.
take whatever service is offered to us, even if it's a crappy service. And as a
Yeah.
family member, I'm going to say that most of the time it is a crappy service.
Hmm.
So um, for us as families to go in with the mindset, like, no, they're not interviewing like my loved one. They're not interviewing me. If you're, a family member supporting your loved one there,
Right.
you're interviewing them to see how you can help us, and the approach that you're going to take, and how that can be customized for my loved one.
Sure.
So I think that's an important piece, because it starts to in our, at least for families, to shift that power dynamic or balance potentially. Um, and then I think another important piece you mentioned there, and so we have a mutual acquaintance, Milton Tyree, that I've
Uh-huh.
learned quite a bit about for unsupported employment. I think that initial phase he calls discovery. So that, do you call it something similar or something
Yeah,
different?
exactly. The same.
Okay,
Yes.
right. So there's discovery kind of on both sides,
Yes.
both for discovery on the individual, and maybe also discovery on the employer side. And you mentioned you want that job to be the job that the person is doing to be of value to the employer, right? We're not just looking for
Yes.
token
No.
jobs here. And that's how you maintain your job, right? If you're providing value,
Absolutely.
then
Absolutely.
then you're needed.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit more to like what that discovery process could look like, both for the individual seeking employment and the on the employer side? Be able to talk to that a bit more?
Yeah, I think that really the most simplistic way I could describe it is, if you think about it's a relationship building time, and it's time where depending on how certain you are about what type of work you want to do, that will dictate a little bit about the process and discovery. Some people don't have any idea what they want to do. And some people are very clear, yet they don't have a relationship with their support provider and it's time to get to know one another on the path to where you're headed for specific requests on a job. But more often than not, people aren't quite sure just what the possibilities are. And so, it's both spending time together in typical environments that you are familiar with as the individual with a disability. So there's observation time, there's getting familiar with, how your life is organized. And then you expand from there out into community. And you kind of, at the end of the time together of exploration at job sites, doing job tours, doing some, exploration, I would say office side also with the support organization. You kind of put all of these experiences together that are crafted for you. And at the end of the time together, you're really looking to identify themes of interest that you have. Um, I could say if somebody was looking for or trying to understand whether they wanted to do office work. I might set up a few places where we could go explore what that looks like, see other people doing those things, maybe try some things out for myself to see, get my hands, engaged or my body engaged with the experience, and see how it feels and debrief that and think about, well, that really wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be when someone told me that was that kind of work.
Yeah.
So you could plunk that story into, do you want to work with boats? Do you want to be, in a more industrial setting or those sorts of things? And you try those things on
Right.
and you try them on together so you can not only see what you think about those things or how you feel about them, but you can also start to learn about someone's learning style, about what they need for training in terms of best ways that they would learn, best ways they would communicate, how they respond to new environments. It's really when you say discovery, it's like an exploratory time
Yeah.
to put together some ideas on where you might go next.
Right. Yeah. I thank you for describing that, because I think you painted a picture for us of what that um, could look like, and also how that would be helpful for a person to get more perspective. Because so often, like, especially if you've never had a job, or just the idea of employment is new to you or new to your family,
Mm.
you might not have thought about it. You might not know what that looks like. So to be able
Yeah.
to experience it and see it with your own eyes gives you a lot more perspective. And I think that spending like time there and creating those experiences is one of the things that I see being skipped.
Hmm.
It's like, we're going to
Hmm.
have an interview in an office, and you're going to tell me what you're interested in, or I'll give you some ideas what you could be interested in. We'll look at some job postings online. Okay, I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Right,
Right.
right, right.
So what you're describing, I think, is what better or best could potentially look
Uh-huh.
like. And then, so doing that discovery and exploration piece with the person, what does that look like on the when searching for an employer side of the equation?
Well, that's one of the things I like the most, I think, is like discovery of your community. And you think about what is going on in my community? What is the economic engine of the community that I live in? And really high performing organizations have their finger on the pulse. And they're constantly looking at different parts of their community to understand what business is going on there, whether it's small startups or whether they're 100-year-old companies or whatever you've got in your neck of the woods, rural to urban. It's your job to know what's happening in the business world in your community, for profit, nonprofit, government, all of those different sectors. And oftentimes, that piece doesn't get worked as hard as all the other pieces because funding might not be sufficient for organizations to spend the kind of time they need to learn their communities, or staffing, or just the demands of the jobs that go on in the placement industry. Yet I like to talk about it because cultivating employers really is more than just placing people in their businesses. It's about the way the community includes people with disabilities and just the typical standards of life, employment being one of those things. But if a community understands that people with disabilities go to work, they'll understand that because you've been a part of helping that community grow and have that language, have that understanding, and ultimately have the expectation that all the citizens in their community with disabilities would go to work, alongside people without disabilities. So we have a
Yeah.
long way to go with that.
Yeah.
But that is a piece of the work and an important piece of the work.
Right. Okay. Awesome. I love that. So if I'm a family listening to this, I'm like, Cecilee, all this sounds great.
Sure.
How would a family kind of get started? Like, what would maybe some starting steps be to, we talked about interviewing agencies, but like, how do I even start to think about doing that?
Well, whatever your connections are to the support network in your community, you've got to find out who is doing the work, number one. And our governmental partners are usually our first stop for figuring out who is available. What are my options? Even all of the organizations will be front facing online. You can compare them just by reading and see how they present themselves. I also think that if I backed up a step, I'd say, and I've worked with families a long time, and I've done a few projects where and not just me, but our organization has, where what we've said is, let's just start the most natural place that we can, and let's think about a mini plan for what you want to accomplish, and think about, okay, there are organizations that can help me do placement work that we're talking about here. But you also have to think about your own network and what you would do typically to network for a job. You want to include that. You don't want that to be separate or different. It needs to be absolutely woven into your process. And then you need to set a goal. I think before you engage with a formal service is to say, what does success look like
Mhm.
for us? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And I encourage families all the time to say, and that can be assisted by a support organization and even led by a support organization. Uh, and yet it's going to be our life and our experience.
Mm.
So you want to make sure that it's, ultimately where you want to go and what you want to do.
Yeah.
And your networks will, be very critical in terms of support for leads or ideas, and part of that discovery process. All of those things come into play like they would for anyone. So
Yeah.
don't sell yourself short on that. Just keep cultivating ideas, cultivating your network, and a lot of jobs are found that way for everyone. And a
Right.
support organization can follow up for you with those. Giving them leads is a really awesome thing.
Right.
Giving them added network by coming in is a really nice balance in the relationship also.
Right.
So
Yeah. Like the main way most people find jobs is through their own personal network or some sort of connection. Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
And
And we have a goal. Like I want to
right.
get a job and
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop until I do. And
Right.
and that's the
And
spirit.
for sure. And I think you made some really good points there around that goal, because if we're not clear on what the goal is and what we want, and we just say, okay, we want to get a job, well, you know, if sometimes I've seen kind of those supportive support agencies, depending on how they're funded or compensated, you know, 4 hours a week, a job that they're placing you in at 4 hours a week might yield them the same compensation from the government or whoever as a full-time job. So and it might be easier to get that 4 hour a week job. So I think as families, we need to be really um, set that goal on, maybe for where our loved one's at, 4 hours a week, maybe that makes sense. But, I would encourage you to think bigger. So maybe,
Yeah.
maybe 15 hours a week makes sense, maybe 20 or 30 or 40. And so I think getting clear on what that could potentially look like, types of jobs, all those sorts of things. Not just the goal to be employed.
Yeah, and I
Would
think
you agree
that
with
that
that?
leads, I would, and I think it leads to an important point about what the conversation is, which is, why do you want to go to work? And what's the ultimate benefit of you going to work? Do you know that as the job candidate and the job seeker? Because I mean, the person themselves being in the driver's seat is ultimately the best case scenario, and with support. So when you have a goal and you're trying to find a job, you're going to make sure that that happens. And that's where quality starts to wrap around, and you enlist people in your experience. And I think that's both with paid support and unpaid supports in your life. You're just adding in some paid folks that have an expertise here, and when you can decide to not accept a 4 hour a week job also because that wasn't your goal,
Right.
but you may be presented a choice where that's an option, and that would be okay. You might decide that that's okay.
Right.
But it's very different for me to look for a job for somebody that comes in and says, I want 20 hours a week minimum. And that's what can work for me right now. And ultimately, I do want to work full time, and I'm not sure how that's going to look. Well, that's a pretty clear statement in terms of what I'm trying to do for development work with you. And it doesn't mean you have to have that ahead of time. It just means that as you're exploring things, you want to get clear on that as you go.
Right. Yeah, I think that's helpful. So we've talked about, we haven't gone in a straight line here in terms of process, and that's on me. But
That's okay.
so setting the employment goal, doing some
Yeah.
research around what support organizations might be available, reaching out to
Hmm.
them, interviewing them, and then hopefully you find one where there's a amazing discovery process, both for that they have with your loved one, but also employers. What might some of those next steps be? So, around, maybe we can quickly touch on, maybe interviewing, and then once you have a job, what would some best practices look like in terms of supporting that person to learn the job, learn the culture of the organization, maybe build relationships there,
Hmm. Hmm.
all those things.
All of those things.
All those
Yes.
things. Yeah. And we got like 10
Oh,
minutes. So no
yeah, sure.
problem, right?
No, no, it's fine. I think if you get anything from our conversation today, I would say think about things as typically as you would with what you've experienced with your own employment if you're supporting someone. And for those of you that haven't worked before, thinking and conversation with people around you that have worked, and what to expect when you go to work. It's building relationships, it's learning the tasks that are being asked of you, and it's learning the environment in terms of what tools and equipment and resources you have to use to get those tasks done. And I think the thing is that um, understanding that every new employee comes in with an onboarding process, and expectations that are set out of benchmarks of how you're going to grow along the way. Your support organization would be helping you determine that and figure out what those benchmarks are, how to, properly communicate what you need with your manager, and check in on those things, and provide training and support that you might need above and beyond what the typical support would be when you start the job. Uh, all of those things, again, I think always goes back to the person that's accepted the job. And if they're motivated about the job, that it's in good alignment with what they thought that they wanted to do, and they have the capability to do the requirements that have been outlined or negotiated when the job starts, then it's just developing um, the person in the place. And that relationship with the support organization is going to change over time because of the advancement of the person. And and it might start over again, depending on other job duties that could get added in, new job opportunities that could get added in. And it's not a stagnant situation. It's a very flexible and always developing situation. So um, I think that great employers are great employers, and then you're an employee that has a great employer, and they're going to work with you if you're working for them and meeting, the commitment you have to them.
Right. Yeah, and we could probably have a conversation around kind of this piece for a couple of hours. And
Yeah,
unfortunately, we
for
don't have time to
sure.
do it today.
For sure.
But maybe just a couple of last questions here for you, Cecilee, with the time that we have. So um, I think sometimes it can be perceived that our loved one needs to have a certain level of loved one with a developmental disability has to have a certain level of capability. Or we
Mhm.
might think that our loved one, their disability is too significant and they're not going to be able to, have a paid job. Um, can you give us maybe a little bit of perspective on that? Because I know that you've seen people with all sorts of disabilities gain employment.
Yeah, I just say I wouldn't put up barriers um, in the process. I just say if the goal is a job, then we go on the journey. And there'll be it may not be that the person that's trying to place your loved one into a job has all of the answers. Quite likely they won't. It takes a lot of people involved in the process for any of us to get a job and for any of us to be supported on a job. And that's no different for somebody with a developmental or intellectual disability. So remember that. And, anytime you get the I can't see it, or I'm uncertain, or I don't think this would work, all you have to do is kind of sit back and say, but what if it could? What if it could? We can be wrong by thinking that something isn't possible, but we can't be wrong because we didn't try.
Mm.
So I just think you really have to keep that in mind. You may not have the vision, you might not have the answers, but always believe that somebody will. Because at the end of the tunnel, I've seen that happen over and over and over again, where somebody has put the right puzzle piece into the puzzle and finished it because everyone's decided to continue to try and find that last piece of the equation, not because they stopped trying.
Mm.
So just, if the goal is employment and the goal is a job, it will happen. You just have to stay the course. And we have a great saying in the States by a wonderful man named Mark Gold that just always said, try another way.
Mm.
Just try another way. It's not always a linear process. It's actually quite windy road often for everyone.
Right.
But we also say, if you believe it, you'll see it. Not if you see it, you'll believe it. So believe that it's going to happen, and you'll see it happen. And surround yourself with people that will believe that it will happen, and it will.
Awesome. I love that. I think that's probably a good way to wrap us up, Cecilee, with those words of wisdom. So thank you so much for being here and sharing some of these perspectives for us to think about as families and to move forward to support our loved ones to gain paid employment. And thank you for the work that you're doing
Yeah,
on all different levels, policy and working with organizations and families, and moving the ball forward on paid employment for people with developmental disabilities. So thank you so much. And thank you for your time here chatting about this today.
you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Awesome. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Cesilee Coulson from WISE, based out of Washington in the United States. And hopefully there's some nuggets in there for you around supported employment, right? We give a great high level overview of what good or better supportive employment can look like for your loved one with a developmental disability. So I forgot to ask Cecilee to share in the podcast or in the video here about what how to reach out and how to learn more about WISE. So to do that, you can go to gowise.org. So just GOWISE.org, and you can learn all about WISE there and their great work and more about Cesilee, and reach out to her and her team as well. So I'm Eric Gall, and I coach families touched by developmental disabilities and work to equip families with knowledge and tools to cultivate an awesome ordinary life with their loved one, ensuring they're cared for and supported today, but also in the future. And if you want to support your loved one to continue to grow their independence and capability, I recommend you head over to empoweringability.org. So again, empoweringability.org to get your free PDF 12 Steps to Independence guide that was created and cultivated from tips and wisdom from over 1,000 parents that I've had the pleasure of working with. So go over to empoweringability.org. You'll see the link there to click and download your guide. So go ahead and do that. And I'm Eric Gall. Together, let's keep taking small steps forward.